Welcome to today's podcast. My name is Pearlie Brewer, and I will be your host. Today's podcast guest is Kody Thorne. Kody suffered a crushed hand while working at the Polar Mountain Ski Hill in 2019. Welcome, Kody, and thank you for agreeing to share your story with our listeners.
Thanks for having me, Pearlie. I appreciate it a lot.
So, Kody, let's start by getting you to tell us about Kody before the accident. What was Kody like?
So, I was just a regular 18-year-old kid, to be honest. I grew up in a small town. I was originally from Alberta, moved to Sussex when I was 4 years old. I had my group of friends, and we ran we were your regular kids. We didn't care about anything. We were living life. We did activities. It was as normal as can be.
Now, how long had you been working at the ski hill? Or what brought you to the ski hill, I should say, to start with?
So what brought me to Ski Hill is it was a perfect work location for me. I started there when I was, 14 years old as the mascot. I moved up and then joined my brother working outside, and it was perfect because neither one of us had our license. We lived 3 minutes away from the ski hill, so it was perfect for my mom. She drove us every day and every night, and any time possible we needed to go to work. It worked out perfect because we lived 10, 15 minutes out of town. We were past the ski hill. So it was the perfect location for us.
So in 2019, you suffered a very bad injury to your hand. Tell us about what happened.
So yeah, in 2019, it was my 6th year of working there. I went back after working in the forestry industry for a little bit. It was supposed to be like a layover almost. It was supposed to be until I found something a bit better to do. I was a supervisor at the ski hill. Well, I would say a supervisor, and everybody else called me their supervisor, but I don't know if that was my actual position. On January 22nd of 2019, we were closed because we had a freezing rainstorm the day before, and the conditions were horrible. Everything was frozen up. And normally I wouldn't work when the hill is closed, but I was so close and knew what to do that they called me in and said, "Hey, could you come in because you're only 3 minutes away? We'd really appreciate it." So I came in. We were unfreezing the carpet lip. So it's I guess not little, it's a 300-foot conveyor belt that takes kids up the hill while they're standing. And there's a drum at the bottom of it that puts pressure on this belt to keep it tight. So when there's 400 kids on it, it would stay tight and keep going up the hill. There's ice all around this belt, all around the drum. And I was tasked with unfreezing this drum and getting the lift to work properly. So what this consisted of is opening the barrier at the bottom and figuring out what the problem was. And unknown to me, right as soon as I opened that barrier, the lift was supposed to be locked out. I opened this barrier, the lift was still running. I got down to look and see what the problem was. I started sweeping ice out of the drum, and my hand got caught. It sucked me right up into my shoulder, and then it kicked out and just had me by my fingertips. There was nothing that could have just released tension on the belt, and I would have got free, probably with minor injuries, maybe some nerve damage or maybe something like that. I was freaking at this point, being an 18-year-old kid, not knowing what's happening. I was losing it. And my coworker that I was working with, who I worked very closely with through that whole season, we were both maintenance people. He was 2 years older than me, so he was 20 at the time. I yelled to him just up the lift. I was stuck in it at this point, and he was probably halfway up, so maybe 100 to 150 feet away. And I was screaming and hollering, like, don't start it, like, I'm stuck, like, don't start it. And he yelled to the guy at the top, don't start it. The guy at the top heard start it. And from there, he started it. The belt started going, and it wrapped me up in and around and caught me on my right-hand side. So my left-hand side was what was injured. And I was stuck there. And all I could think is, wow, this is how I'm going to go out, is 18 years old being crushed by a carpet lift. Like, that's quite the story to have as a 18-year-old kid. It was pretty interesting. Like, it was how the whole thing went, like, how it all happened in play-by-play. It was a horrible day that day. They had to cut me out of this belt. So my coworker, the 20-year-old, he radioed to our other coworker who was at the garage at the time to bring something to cut me out. He brought a hacksaw, cut the belt, and released tension on it. And I jumped up. My truck was right there at the bottom of the lift. I hopped in the passenger seat of my truck, and my coworker hopped in the driver's seat. And all I remember is pulling my glove off and just sitting there and looking at my hand. And there was muscle and everything, and it was all bloody, and I just sat there and looked at it the whole way to Sussex. And it was probably a 25-minute drive to Sussex that day because the roads were so bad. And normally it's only a 10-minute drive to Sussex. And they got me my coworker got me to the hospital, and I ran through those emergency doors, and that's basically how it started, was how my hospital journey started.
So what happened after that you remember?
So I stayed at the Sussex Hospital for probably an hour and a half because they were trying to figure out what to do with me and everything because the roads are so bad. My mother called my phone, and one of the nurses answered that, and she came down. My stepdad came down, and my brother came to the Sussex Hospital, and we were waiting for doctors. We were waiting to see what the plan was, and most times they transfer you to St. John. Like, not very often does Sussex handle a emergency of that situation. So I did end up getting transferred to St. John. They took me by ambulance. I was awake I was still awake. I never passed out or anything during any of this. It was an hour and a half drive from Sussex to St. John that day. So it was double the time in an ambulance, because the roads were so bad. And I got to the St. John Regional Hospital, and I was sitting in the emergency room. The emergency doctor looked at me. At this point, I was very frustrated because you're not allowed to have any water or anything. So it made for an interesting time. I'm hungry. I'm thirsty. Not happy to be in the situation that I'm in and getting no answers at all. But it ended up being good in the end because they took me to the clinic in St. John, and the surgeon was just going to fix my hand in the clinic because he'd just seen the x-rays and the CTs and everything at this point. And he was saying, oh yeah, I can just fix that in the clinic, like, no worries. And he arrives and looks at my hand and he says, oh no, we're going to do emergency surgery right away. So I went into emergency surgery. That was 2 to 3 hours. They fixed my 2 broken metacarpals in my pointer and middle finger. He put 2 pins in my thumb, and yeah, that was about it for the first surgery.
So since then, you've had a number of surgeries?
I've had 4 surgeries total, including that one, and multiple procedures. The second surgery was 4 days after this first one. So I was in the hospital for 2 days after the first one, just being monitored. And I was released, and he's like, yeah, just come back Monday. Like, we'll check in with you. It ended up being that I didn't have adequate blood flow to my fingers, my middle finger and my pointer finger and my thumb. So I went in for an emergency angiogram, and that's where they put dye into your veins, and they take pictures, and they can see how much blood your hand is actually getting in real time. And I had very, very minimum. Like, if they had to let me stay how I was, my pointer finger and my middle finger probably would have died as well. And after the angiogram, I went for another emergency surgery. And this one was 6 hours long. So he rerouted an artery out of my wrist. He was going to take it out of my leg, but he found the one in my wrist. And it ended up I'm not greatest on these terms because I don't know all the hospital terms. He pretty much backflowed my hand. So it was running through my blood vessels and not into the muscle first, but into the blood vessels and then into the muscle. So then my fingers would stay alive, and it would go through all the little capillaries and blood vessels and everything. So that surgery worked out good. It ended up doing what it needed to. The third surgery. So this was it was a month later after my accident. The third surgery was him connecting me to my hip. So at this point, my thumb was totally black. The tip of it was very black. Say if a person got frostbite or has diabetes or something like that. It was, so he had to either just totally amputate it or do this groin flap. And the groin flap consisted of connecting me to my hip for 5 weeks and 5 days. I have different color skin on my thumbs, so it's all, this is where I was connected. And it was his first time doing this stuff. So it's textbook, but it was first time, the moving the artery was first time for him. Doing the groin flap was the first time for him. A lot of it's first for him, and it's first for me as well too, obviously. And it was pretty crazy because I was just sitting there, basically an impenetrable loop between my hip and my shoulder, and I sat for that for 5 weeks. And the fourth surgery was he went in and cleaned it. So when I was connected to my hip, I came in for day surgery, and he had to go in and look around and clean it all out and everything. And yeah, that was the last surgery. And then to take me out of my hip, I was awake for that. So I was just in the clinic, and that was procedures. But I did have multiple procedures. I went and seen him weekly for at least 2 months. I seen him weekly. And he would open it up and do things and do this. And it was a very interesting process, that's for sure. Because it's not none of it's planned. So that's what was hard for me, is I'm a very plan-oriented person. And none of this stuff was ever planned. I would show up and he'd be doing something different every day. And not that I cared, obviously, because he had to do it. But it was just hard on me at the time.
Now, going back to the day of the injury, I read an article that was done by CBC, and they talked about the investigation that was done by WorkSafe.
Yep.
And eventually it led to a court case. Yep. Tell us about the court case and your feelings about that process.
So I don't want to sound like I'm ranting here, and it's going to be hard not to. On my end, there was no prosecution at all. I signed all these documents at the age of 18 years old stating I would take workers' compensation, not knowing at the time that I was giving up my right to sue anybody that could be held liable in this accident. Pulley Mountain did end up getting a $3,000 fine from Works. Well, they did get a $3,000 fine by the judge for not providing adequate supervision. And I really don't agree with that. And I don't really agree with what the judge said about the corporation has had an appropriate response, and it's not a situation where there's flagrant disregard for safety. Because there was not safety at all at that ski hill. I worked there for 6 years. My brother worked there for 6 years, who's 3 years older than me. He's the one who trained me. I'm the one who trained other people. There was no procedures. There was no training. There wasn't anything. There wasn't inspections. There was your regular government inspections that would have to be done on the lifts, like your elevator inspections, because they're fell under the Elevator Act. But other than that, there's nothing. Like when they do cherry evacuations at Pulley Mountain, like every year, the whole staff is trained on cherry evacuations. That is one thing they do train on. But I was the person running that lift while they were doing the cherry evacuations, and it's on me not to hit the start button when they're hoisting these people down from the chairlift. They just had one back here in March, I think, and I'd be very interested to know if that lift was locked out while they're hoisting 5-year-old children down from that chairlift. Because any time I was there, it was not. And it's horrible to say, but a 5-year-old child could be on that chairlift, and it's ran by a computer. And my stepdad's an electrician, and he's like, it's a computer. It has a mind of its own. You don't have to hit the button. It can hit the button on its own. And that 5-year-old child could be hanging there and being dragged up that lift and not knowing what's going on.
Now, so you were not given any lockout training?
No, any time that I was there was no lockout training given. Like, I worked, like, maintenance per se. My last, like, the year I got hurt, and we would do lift maintenance. So we'd be climbing these towers, the lift towers, and they're 50 to 100, like 50 to 60 feet tall, or even taller. And we're up there with the line lifted off the tower, replacing bearings and wheels and everything. And that lift was not locked out. And we didn't have any fall arrest training. I would say maybe half the time we were wearing a harness. And if that we were wearing a harness, it wasn't properly inspected. It was some harness that you found in the bottom of the locker and hoped it fit. There wasn't anything. And from my understanding, WorkSafe was there every year. I went and talked to the general manager now just this last year, and I asked him when they had an order last, because when I did a student work term at ME Power, and there was orders thrown around there left, right, and center, like WorkSafe would be down there, and you get an order for this and get an order, and I didn't really know what an order was, and until one day WorkSafe showed up at the Rossay district office for ME Power, and they handed out 5 orders for bulletin board being incorrect and workers not being provided adequate knowledge of how to use a safety site. And I was like, well, I wonder when the last time Pulley Mountain got an order was. So I went up and talked to the general manager there now, and he says to his knowledge, the last one was when they had their old lodge. So this was quite a little while ago at least. And it was for inadequate, no fall arrest system. So the guys shoveling the roof weren't wearing harnesses, which is a blatant negligence. And obviously that wasn't kept up on because we weren't wearing harnesses so many years later. But he told me they were there every year. And how do you miss something like that as a work-safe officer? How do you not see that there's no training, no procedures, no lockout, no anything so yeah.
So was there an actual trial that happened, or was this some sort of plea bargain?
Could you repeat that, Pearlie?
Was there an actual trial that was held for Pulley Mountain, or was there a deal reached somewhat as a plea deal?
So there was a trial held. I went to one. Can't remember when it was, but they they asked for more time the first time. They asked for a extended time. Mm-hmm. And this was just before COVID happened. So when the trial actually happened on June 26th of 2020, this is when COVID was going on, I was told I wasn't allowed in the courtroom.
Okay.
Even though from my schooling since, I've now learned that I would be allowed in there because I have information pertaining to that case, which nobody told me at the time. And who would know that as I was a 20-year-old person. But I would have stood outside the courtroom, or would have stood outside the court building as Stephen Moffat, the president, did. But I wasn't told it was happening. The first time I went, I was approached by the Telegraph-Journal, and the WorkSafe investigator was standing there with me, talking to me, and he had advised me not to talk to the Telegraph-Journal, as they would be fishing for information. And I was like, well, okay, you're the subject matter expert here, not about talking to the media, but for this kind of stuff. And I was like, I'll take your word for it. So I didn't talk to media. And that seemed like my only shot until I reached out to them here this year and told my side of the story and how it actually happened.
Obviously, not a lot of what should have been in place was in place. Yeah. What would you say to young workers, if you were talking to a group of young workers, for example, about what happened to you and about what they should look for in a workplace and what they should expect to receive about training when they do go to work?
So that's kind of a hard question for me, and I'll talk as if I am still young. I'm only 23 years old. But if I were to put myself sitting in that seat and me talking to myself, I wouldn't have listened to myself. When a person came to the school to present, I remember one person very blatantly actually speaking at my school, and it's because he had a very interesting story, but he had made a name for himself, a very big name for himself. It was actually damn right hell. But a lot of the other ones I don't remember. They in one year and out the other. And for this stuff, it's hard because the only reason I learned about all this stuff was because I did hours and hours and hours and hours of research. But it's hard because as a young worker, you are expected to know all these things. It is on you to know this stuff. And yes, everybody says you have a right to refuse, but if you don't know when to use that right, it's pointless. There's ins and outs of everything, and to know every single in and out is very, very hard. But something I would say is be mindful of how you're treated in your workplace, because I wasn't treated the best. I was put on my own and said, go basically figure it out for yourself. No person should be put in that situation ever, especially an 18-year-old young adult. If you should be shown, you should never be taken for granted and for not knowing anything, is what I'm trying to say, I guess.
So I guess there's a couple of questions I'd like to ask. One is, you mentioned that it's, in a lot of cases, young people won't listen to people coming in, talking to them and so on about health and safety. How do you go about to reach young people? You've been through a terrible accident, terrible injury. Any suggestions that you could think of and how organizations could go about to better educate young workers to so that they would listen?
So, not to toot my own horn here, but someone with a major injury or something like that,
yeah.
This has affected them. So I remember our MAD presentations, like Mothers Against Drunk Driving presentations. They actually brought mothers in that their children were killed because of drunk drivers, or they had stories of people actually being killed because of drunk drivers. You never heard about this stuff in school, like workplace health and safety. It wasn't a thing. Like, I wouldn't have had a clue about it, and I really, even like, if I didn't get hurt, I still probably wouldn't have known. Because it's just a thing that's on the back of your head and you don't think about it until it happens. But bring someone in that has, like, share real-time stories. Like, just telling kids facts doesn't help them at all. Like, they don't really care about that stuff. And I can speak firsthand of that. I could have cared less for school and what it had to offer and everything. And the facts that were told, I cared about the stories. Like, Dan Martell had a very interesting story. That's why I still remember him to this day. The MAD stories, were very interesting, and they actually hit home, like, a little bit. So it made a difference.
Well, what's next for Kody Thorne?
That's hard to answer, because I did go through my certificate in occupational health and safety through UNB College of Extended Learning. I was supposed to go through the diploma in occupational health and safety through UNB, but I didn't end up doing it because after looking at all the qualifications and certifications, that extra 10 courses really wouldn't have advanced me anywhere. And I was never one for schooling. I was going to be that kid that went and worked out west on the oil rigs and didn't really care to go to university. So it was hard for me doing all this stuff. Like, the certificate in occupational health and safety was 1,100 pages of reading. And yes, it benefits me a little bit now, but it was basically an open book course the whole time. So if the diploma was like that, I was like, well, I'm not going to do this again and waste my time with it, for instance. But I did end up, I wrote my my CRST exam through the CRSP, like the BCRSP.
Right.
I didn't end up passing it, unfortunately, and it kind of screwed me over in the end, because they only offer that course once a year. Well, that test once a year. And unbeknown to my knowledge, I didn't know that when I signed up for this. Like, it was all on me. WorkSafe really didn't help me with that process of what was next. So I probably wouldn't have got into health and safety if I had known that I needed a year's experience and there was only once a year testing. and you need all this other stuff. But I'm going to try to pursue a career in health and safety, hopefully an advisor or a field position level. Like, I really don't want to pursue that Canadian Registered Safety Professional, because it seems like they're mostly office and paperwork and stuff. I want to be boots on the ground, talking to people and sharing my experience with others, and hopefully try to change their future.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's basically it for me.
Well, look, thank you very much for sharing your story with us. I very much agree with you when you say that the way to reach young people, as well as, to me, it's not just young people, it's older people, in so many cases, is to share the stories with them. Sometimes people get overloaded with information, but when you hear a story like yours, I'll tell you, it really drives the message home.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for sharing your story with us, and hopefully you'll get a chance to share your story with many other people.
Yeah, hopefully that's the plan.
So thank you again very much, Kody, for today's podcast. We'll wrap it up, and certainly would like to have any kind of feedback that you would like to send us. You can reach us at pearly@ssnb.ca. Thank you very much for listening to today's podcast, and especially a big thank you to Kody for sharing the story with us.